There's something about silence that doesn't sit right with me anymore. I've come to realize that in the quiet moments, the ones where life feels normal and safe, lies the potential for everything to shatter. My name is Mark, and I used to believe I'd finally figured life out. After the chaos of my first marriage, Emily was my second chance, my clean slate. She was supposed to be my calm after the storm. I met Emily 8 years ago, during one of the lowest points in my life. My first wife had left me, not just with a broken heart but with a fractured relationship with my son, Jason, who was only 15 at the time. Divorce had hit Jason hard. I had tried to be the steady father he needed, but my own wounds made me clumsy at best. Then Emily entered my life like a warm breeze. She was everything my first wife wasn't: kind, nurturing, patient. At 36, Emily had a vibrancy I hadn't known in years. She helped me heal in ways I didn't think were possible. She embraced Jason like he was her own, which meant everything to me. Watching her take him under her wing, encouraging him with his passions, even mediating the occasional father-son spat, made me feel like we could actually be a family. Fast forward to today, and on the surface, it looks like we've done just that. Jason, now 23, is grown and finding his way in the world, though he still visits often. Emily and I have built a comfortable life together. She's helped me piece together the version of myself I thought I'd lost, stronger, wiser, ready for the second chapter of my life. But lately, something has felt off. It started subtly. Emily, who used to leave her phone lying around, now seems glued to it. She's careful with it in a way she never was before, always face down on the table, passcode updated, notifications hidden. When I asked her why, she brushed it off, saying something about work needing more security. Then there were the absences. Emily started taking long walks after dinner, something she never used to do. Just clearing my head, she'd say, her tone casual but her answers vague when I asked where she'd gone. Sometimes, she'd claim to have plans with friends, but when I suggested tagging along, she'd laugh it off, saying it was girl stuff I wouldn't enjoy. The distance between us wasn't just physical. Our intimacy, the once steady rhythm of our life together, had faltered. Where we used to find comfort in each other's arms, there was now an awkwardness, like strangers fumbling through a routine neither of us wanted to acknowledge had grown cold. I didn't want to overthink it. After all, marriage isn't all sunshine and romance, right? Everyone goes through phases. I'd tell myself this over and over, chalking up her behavior to stress or the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But deep down, a small, nagging voice whispered that something wasn't right. That voice grew louder one evening when Emily came home late. She'd mentioned a work meeting earlier that day but hadn't shared many details. When she finally walked through the door, her excuse felt rehearsed. "How was the meeting?" I asked casually, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. "Good," she said, setting her bag down and avoiding my eyes. "It ran a little late, but we got a lot done." I wanted to believe her, but there was a faint scent of cologne on her jacket, a scent that wasn't mine. Still, I didn't press. Confrontation wasn't my strong suit. I'd spent my first marriage in constant battles, and I'd sworn never to live that way again. But the doubt lingered. As days turned into weeks, the signs became harder to ignore. Emily's once open and affectionate demeanor seemed to fade. Her laughter, her smiles, they were still there, but they felt different, like a performance meant to distract me. Even Jason noticed something was up. "Is everything okay with you and Emily?" he asked one weekend when he stopped by. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. She just seems distant," he said, shrugging. I dismissed his concerns, telling myself it was just stress. But the truth was, I didn't have an answer for him. Looking back, I wondered if part of me already knew what was coming. Maybe that's why I didn't dig deeper right away. Ignorance, after all, can feel like safety, until it isn't. As I lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling while Emily slept soundly beside me, I realized I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. If there was something going on, I needed to know. Because while silence can be comforting, it can also be the prelude to the loudest chaos of your life. It started with a small vibration from Emily's phone. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, her scrolling aimlessly, me half watching a show neither of us cared about. When she got up to refill her tea, she left the phone face down on the cushion. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But this time, I noticed the screen light up briefly before dimming again. A single word had flashed across the notification banner, J. J. My first thought was Jason. But no, that didn't make sense. Jason rarely messaged Emily directly, they usually communicated through me. Still, the curiosity nagged at me. When Emily returned, she grabbed her phone quickly, angling the screen away as she tapped a response. "Who's that?" I asked casually, not even looking at her. "Work stuff," she said, too quickly, her voice unnaturally high. "Just a client." Something felt off, but I didn't push. Not then. But later that night, when she fell asleep, I crept downstairs with my heart pounding in my chest and opened our shared laptop. Emily had synced her phone to the device, a convenience for when she needed to back up photos. I didn't feel proud of what I was doing, but something deep inside screamed at me to look. It didn't take long to find the message. J wasn't a work client. The text thread, brief but loaded with subtext, made my stomach turn. "J, you looked incredible tonight. I can't stop thinking about you. Emily, you're too much. When can I see you again?" I reread it several times, hoping the words would morph into something innocuous. Maybe J was a friend teasing her about an outfit. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But the way she signed off with a winking emoji, Emily, who never used emojis, felt deliberate. I put the laptop away, telling myself I needed more information before confronting her. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Or maybe I was being naive. Over the next week, the nagging doubt grew louder. Emily started coming home later, claiming she had meetings that ran over. She spent more time on her phone, texting with a secretive smile. Once, when I walked into the room unexpectedly, she jumped and quickly locked the screen. I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, while she was showering, I slipped her car keys from the hook by the door and installed a GPS tracker on the undercarriage. The app on my phone would show me her every move. If nothing else, I'd have proof to calm my spiraling mind. The tracker app didn't show anything unusual at first, just her usual routes to work, the grocery store, and back home. But on a Thursday evening, when she said she was running errands, the app pinged a location far from our usual haunts. A hotel. My chest tightened as I watched her sit stationary in the parking lot for over an hour. This had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe she was meeting someone for work, a coworker or client. I clung to these excuses like a life raft as I grabbed my keys and drove to the address, the tracker app guiding me. The hotel wasn't a luxury spot but one of those mid-range chains with bright signage and ample parking. I spotted Emily's car easily, it was parked near the side entrance. My palms were slick with sweat as I parked a few spaces away and waited. 20 minutes later, the door opened, and she emerged. She wasn't alone. My breath caught in my throat as Jason stepped out behind her. My son. My 23-year-old son, grinning at her like a lovesick teenager. Emily laughed at something he said, her hand brushing against his arm in a way that made my skin crawl. They lingered for a moment, standing too close, before heading to their cars. I sat frozen in disbelief, unable to reconcile what I'd just seen. It had to be a mistake. Maybe they'd bumped into each other by chance. Maybe they were discussing something innocent, like a surprise for me. But deep down, I knew better. The way they looked at each other was unmistakable. That night, I didn't sleep. I scrolled through the GPS history, finding more trips to the same hotel, spaced weeks or sometimes days apart. The app confirmed what I didn't want to admit: this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern. Over the next few days, I dug deeper. I checked her social media, combed through our shared accounts, and even called the hotel pretending to inquire about a lost item. The receptionist confirmed that Emily and her guest were regulars. I felt sick to my stomach. When I couldn't take the silence any longer, I called Jason. I didn't confront him outright but asked vague questions about his life and whether he'd been keeping busy. His answers were cheerful, oblivious. But one thing stood out: when I asked about Emily, he hesitated. Yeah, he said. We've talked a bit. She's been great, really supportive. Supportive. The word twisted in my gut like a knife. By the end of the week, I'd pieced together enough evidence to know the truth. Emily and Jason had been seeing each other for over a year. It started shortly after Jason moved back to town. From what I could gather, their affair began innocently, long talks that evolved into something darker. And all the while, I'd been clueless, thinking we were building a happy, blended family. That night, I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. My wife. My son. The two people I trusted most had been lying to me for months, maybe longer. My reflection was hollow-eyed and pale, a ghost of the man I'd been. How had I missed the signs? Had I been too trusting? Too blind? I didn't have the answers, only the searing pain of knowing that my world would never be the same again. The silence in the house was oppressive. Emily sat at the kitchen table, scrolling on her phone as though everything were normal. Her calm demeanor ignited something inside me, a searing anger mixed with disbelief. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breath. It was time. Emily, I said, my voice sharper than intended. She looked up, startled by the tone. What is it? I pulled out my phone, opened the tracker app, and placed it on the table in front of her. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me. For a moment, there was confusion. Then understanding. Finally, something colder, defiance. What is this? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. You know exactly what it is, I replied. It's how I found you at the hotel. With him. Emily's expression didn't change, but her grip on her phone tightened. I don't know what you're talking about, she said evenly, standing up. You're being ridiculous. Don't do that, I said, my voice rising. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know. She paused, then sat back down slowly, her eyes narrowing. Okay, fine. What are you accusing me of, Mark? Don't play games with me, Emily, I snapped, throwing a folder onto the table. Inside were printouts, screenshots of her messages, hotel receipts, GPS records. This is what I'm accusing you of. You, sneaking around with my son. My son, Emily. What kind of person does that? Her face paled, but she didn't look away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. So, you've been spying on me? That's what you're focused on? I asked, incredulous. After everything you've done, you're trying to make me the villain. She sighed, shaking her head. Mark, you're blowing this out of proportion. Blowing it out of proportion? I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. You've been sleeping with Jason. For over a year. How could you? Her expression hardened. It's not as simple as you think. I froze, thrown off by her sudden shift in tone. Not as simple. I echoed. You've been having an affair with my son, Emily. What could possibly complicate that? Her eyes met mine, cold and unflinching. Do you even hear yourself, Mark? Do you ever stop to think about how you've been in this marriage? You've been distant. Cold. Wrapped up in your own world. I was lonely. I stared at her, stunned. Lonely? That's your excuse for this? Jason listened to me, she continued, her voice rising. He cared. He saw me. When was the last time you did that? My heart pounded in my chest, a sick mix of fury and heartbreak. He's my son, I hissed. You knew how much he meant to me, and you still. Oh, don't act like you've been some model father, she snapped, cutting me off. Jason came to me because you failed him first. You were never there for him when he needed you. Maybe if you had been a better parent, he wouldn't have been so vulnerable. The words hit like a physical blow. I staggered back a step, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. Are you actually trying to blame me for this? I asked, my voice low and trembling. You're justifying what you did by saying it's my fault. Emily didn't flinch. I'm saying it didn't happen in a vacuum, Mark. You neglect people. You neglect me. And Jason, she hesitated, then continued, Jason filled a void that you created. My composure cracked. Don't you dare try to spin this around on me, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You're the one who made the choice. You betrayed me. You betrayed this family. And you have the audacity to blame Jason's feelings on me? She stood up, her voice icy. I'm not going to sit here and let you paint me as a monster. You want to blame someone? Blame yourself. Blame the fact that you never paid attention to the people who loved you. I stared at her, my hands trembling. For a moment, I didn't trust myself to speak. When I finally did, my voice was cold and steady. I loved you. I trusted you. And you destroyed that. You destroyed us. But I'll tell you this, Emily, you don't get to turn this around on me. You don't get to make yourself the victim. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting her off. Enough, I said. I'm done listening to your excuses. You made your choices. Now you'll face the consequences. She glared at me, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. What do you mean? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there with her lies and justifications. I felt hollow, like a part of me had been ripped away. But beneath the pain, something else was taking root, resolve. Emily had shattered the life we built together. But I wasn't going to let her destroy me. Not completely. After Emily stormed upstairs and slammed the bedroom door, the house fell silent. Too silent. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the framed photo on the mantel, a picture of all three of us from a barbecue last summer. Jason had his arms slung casually over my shoulder, Emily was laughing, and I had been blissfully unaware of what was lurking beneath the surface. That photo had always felt warm and comforting, a snapshot of the family I thought I had. Now, it made my stomach turn. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over. Every word Emily said cut deeper with each repetition. Jason understood me. You neglected us. Her excuses rattled around in my head like loose screws. Worse were the images that my mind conjured without permission. Jason and Emily together, laughing, whispering, sharing secrets they had no business sharing. The way she had looked at him when she thought I wasn't watching, a glimmer of something I'd foolishly dismissed as maternal affection. How long had I been blind? I thought back to Jason's childhood. He was a quiet kid, always thoughtful and reserved. After the divorce from his mother, I'd done everything I could to make the transition easier for him. I worked extra hours to provide for him, spent weekends coaching his soccer team, and stayed up late helping with his science projects. He was my world. When I met Emily, her warmth and patience had been a balm for both of us. She encouraged Jason to open up, to trust again. She planned camping trips, baked his favorite cookies, and even helped him navigate his awkward teenage years. I used to think she was the glue that held us together. Now I realized she had been weaving a web. Memories came flooding back over the following days, each one more painful than the last. I remembered how Emily used to urge me to spend more time with Jason, saying, "He looks up to you, Mark. Don't let him down." I had taken her words to heart, rearranging my schedule to make room for father-son time. Now, those memories felt grotesque, like a cruel joke at my expense. I couldn't stop replaying moments that suddenly seemed tainted. Like last Christmas, when Emily had insisted we include Jason in every family photo, standing between us with that same easy grin. Or the time she suggested Jason help her pick out my birthday gift. "He knows you so well," she'd said with a smile. Had that been part of their act? Or was I just projecting my bitterness onto every interaction? The anger came in waves. At first, it was directed solely at Emily. She was the adult, the one who should have known better, the one who should have set boundaries. But as the days passed, I couldn't ignore Jason's role in this. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a grown man. My son. My blood. How could he betray me like this? I remembered the day I taught Jason how to ride a bike. He was terrified of falling, but I ran alongside him, cheering him on until he found his balance. When he finally got it, he turned and beamed at me, yelling, "Dad, I did it." That same boy had now become a stranger to me, someone who could smile in my face while stabbing me in the back. The sadness was overwhelming. For years, I had believed I was building something solid, something real. I thought I had found a partner in Emily, someone who truly understood me. And Jason, I thought I was giving him the kind of stable, loving home I'd always wanted him to have. But now it felt like everything I'd built was a lie, crumbling beneath the weight of their betrayal. One evening, I stood in the garage, surrounded by the remnants of our life together, a box of Jason's childhood toys, the camping gear we used to take on family trips, Emily's gardening tools. I picked up a baseball glove Jason had outgrown years ago and ran my fingers over the worn leather. It was small, almost comically so, and for a moment, I could see him as he used to be, a wide-eyed kid with scraped knees and boundless curiosity. I clutched the glove to my chest, my knees buckling under the weight of it all. I cried for the boy he had been, for the man he had become, and for the father I thought I was. But eventually, the tears dried. And in their place, something else emerged, resolve. I realized that my silence wasn't a sign of weakness, it was my greatest weapon. I didn't need to scream or throw things or beg for answers. I didn't owe them anything, not my forgiveness, not my understanding, not my time. Over the next few days, I began to move with purpose. I made calls, quietly consulting with my attorney to protect what little dignity I had left. I started documenting everything, emails, receipts, texts. If Emily wanted a fight, I would make sure I came out of it intact. More importantly, I decided to focus on myself. I began clearing out the clutter in my life, both literal and figurative. I packed up the photos, the mementos, the reminders of what we had once been. Each item I boxed away felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. For the first time in days, I looked in the mirror and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, clarity. Emily and Jason had taken something from me, something sacred. But they hadn't taken everything. I still had my dignity. I still had my will to fight. And I still had my future, one that didn't include their lies. The pain of their betrayal would never fully fade. I knew that. But I also knew that I couldn't let it define me. As I closed the garage door and walked back into the house, I felt a sense of calm. The storm inside me had passed. Now, it was time to rebuild. The days that followed were a blur of planning and precision. Anger and sadness had given way to something colder, something sharper. I knew I couldn't let their betrayal consume me. Instead, I would turn their deceit into my strength. If Emily and Jason thought they had broken me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The first step was gathering evidence. I spent hours combing through our shared finances, looking for discrepancies. It didn't take long to uncover Emily's mismanagement. She had funneled money into private accounts, presumably to finance her affair. Meanwhile, Jason, my own son, had been living rent-free in the apartment I helped him secure, likely using it as their meeting spot when they weren't sneaking off to hotels. Armed with this information, I contacted my attorney. "We're not just filing for divorce," I told him. "We're making sure the truth comes out." A week later, I set my plan into motion. I invited everyone over for a family dinner: Emily, Jason, and even Jason's girlfriend, Claire. Emily was skeptical at first. "Why now?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I think it's time we all sat down and reconnected," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We've been through a lot. It's important to move forward as a family." Her hesitation melted into relief. She probably thought I was finally forgiving her. Jason accepted the invitation without hesitation, and Claire, sweet and unsuspecting, was thrilled at the chance to join. I spent the next few days preparing. The slideshow was the piece de resistance. I filled it with photos, family vacations, birthday celebrations, and, toward the end, the evidence. Screenshots of Emily and Jason's messages. Photos of them together, taken from the hotel's security footage. Receipts and timestamps, all meticulously compiled. The night of the dinner, I cooked Emily's favorite meal. She arrived early, dressed in an outfit I hadn't seen in years. "You went all out," she said, kissing me on the cheek. The gesture made my skin crawl, but I smiled through it. Jason arrived next, looking sheepish but trying to act normal. Claire was the last to show, her usual bubbly self. She hugged me warmly, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. We sat around the table, eating and chatting as if nothing had changed. For a moment, I almost felt guilty about what I was about to do. But then I looked at Emily and Jason, laughing like they hadn't torn my life apart, and the guilt disappeared. Before dessert, I announced, standing up, "I want to share something special with all of you. A little trip down memory lane." Emily's eyes lit up, likely expecting some sentimental gesture. Jason looked curious, and Claire clapped her hands excitedly. I dimmed the lights and started the slideshow. The first few slides were exactly what they expected, pictures from happier times. Emily smiled nostalgically, and even Jason seemed moved. But as the slides progressed, the tone shifted. A screenshot of an incriminating text appeared on the screen. Emily froze. Jason's face drained of color. Claire's brow furrowed. What is this?" she asked. The next slide showed a hotel receipt with both their names. Then a time-stamped photo of them exiting the hotel together. By now, Emily was trembling, her eyes darting toward Jason. Jason opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. "You wanted to talk about family, Emily," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "Let's talk about what you've been doing to this family." Claire turned to Jason, her expression a mix of confusion and anger. "Jason? What is this? Is this real?" Jason stammered, "Claire, this isn't what it looks like." "Don't you dare lie to her," I snapped. "You've done enough of that already." Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is cruel, Mark. How could you do this? How could I do this?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me, to this family, for over a year. Don't you dare talk to me about cruelty." Jason tried to intervene. "Dad, please. Don't," I said, turning to face him. "You don't get to, Dad, me after what you've done." Claire stood too, tears streaming down her face. "Jason, is this true? Are you sleeping with Emily?" Jason hesitated for a moment too long. Claire let out a choked sob and stormed out of the room. Jason moved to follow her, but I blocked his path. "You'll always be my son," I said, my voice cold, "but you'll never be my family. Not after this." He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret, but I didn't waver. Emily grabbed her purse, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. "You've gone too far, Mark," she spat. "No," I said, my voice steady. "You did." She stormed out, Jason trailing behind her. The door slammed, leaving me alone in the quiet house. The next day, Emily was served with divorce papers. Jason moved out of the apartment shortly after, and Claire broke things off with him for good. Word of the affair spread quickly through Emily's workplace, thanks to a few well-placed documents I'd sent anonymously. As for me, I packed up my life and left. I sold the house, moved to a smaller city, and started fresh. The betrayal had cut deep, but it taught me something invaluable: my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's actions. I built a new circle of friends, people I could trust. I started hiking again, something I hadn't done in years. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I was too harsh. Maybe I should have handled things differently. But then I remember their betrayal, the lies, the deceit, and I feel justified. So I'll leave it to you, reader. Was my revenge too much, or did they deserve worse? What would you have done in my place?